I should be writing number 383 for Monday, September 11th, 2017.
Well, I should be writing. I should be working on my craft. I should be writing. I should be submitting my next draft. But I'm sitting home watching Doctor Who.
Hi there, welcome to I Should Be Writing, the podcast for wannabe fiction writers. I'm your host, Mer Lafferty, and I'm getting back into things. I've been mostly productive lately, trying to do a bunch of short-term projects while not ignoring my long-term projects. Speaking of short-term projects, you should be able to see my new website. Hopefully it's up by now. I've got a lot of work to do on my end on it and trying to find the time. And I will have been in New York this past weekend doing another summit for book burners. So every year we get together and talk about the next series of stories for book burners. We'll be meeting for season 4 shortly, and then there's just one left. It's weird to think I've been working on this for so long. But I have a couple of other projects that are in the works, I suppose, that I'm not going to talk about. But I will be starting on my Patreon project very shortly. If you want to be a Patreon subscriber at $10 or up, you can get the serial as it comes out. And it's only coming out for serialized for Patreon supporters. When I'm done, I'll have it edited and put it on Amazon for self-pub, but for now, it's only Patreon people. Today's interview will be Beth Cato, author of Call of Fire, and I have a copy of the book to give out. I think her publicist sent me a copy of book 1 in the series, because getting a copy of book 2 feels weird, but I'll work that out. So if you want to spread the word about this podcast on Twitter or Facebook, and send me an email saying you'd like the books, I will draw someone at random and get them to you. But that's coming up a little bit later. I want to talk a little bit, since we're getting back to the basics, about protagonists and antagonists, because a lot of people get this mixed up. They think of the protagonist as the hero, somebody good who we root for, and the antagonist as the villain who's bad. But the protagonist is the person who the story focuses on and whose actions change the story. The antagonist is the person whose job it is to get in their way. I think I've made this reference before. If you take something as simple as a sports event, each team is the antagonist for the other one, and they think they're the heroes. So they're there to get in the way of the other person so that they can win. It becomes more interesting when you think about the strength of points of view and the protagonist and the antagonist. I am dismayed and fascinated by people's responses to the wife in Breaking Bad, because that is a point where a good guy is not the hero. It's a man driven to do some terrible things because of a terrible situation, but he does terrible things. But because we see it from his point of view, we start rooting for him, even though he's doing terrible things. And his wife, just step outside the plot of Breaking Bad and just listen. There's a woman whose husband has cancer. She's pregnant. They have another special needs child, and then her husband starts making drugs and selling them and getting involved with a lot of violent stuff. You'd almost judge her if she didn't think that was a very bad thing. But no, because she served as someone to stand in his way, a lot of people called her very terrible things. The point of view, I'm going to talk point of view and character at the same time because it's important. The point of view is vital here. If you see what's going on in someone's head, you have vital information that other characters don't. Another thing I've heard people complain about how Sansa Stark treats Tyrion. I'm thinking, they've been seeing Tyrion as this hero this whole time because you see Tyrion's point of view. But for Sansa, she only knows him as the brother of the terrible queen, the person who possibly tried to kill her little brother, and he's a Lannister. So you really can't blame her for not wanting to have anything to do with him. But because we see Tyrion's point of view, and we think Tyrion's this great character, and he is, he's a very interesting, layered character, and he is worth rooting for, we think that he's being mistreated by Sansa, but that's because she doesn't know what we know, and her point of view is different. So that's how you make, if you want to write a story about somebody who's bad, you do it from that point of view. You make us care about the character. You make us care about their well-being and almost to root for them. If you want us to care about a thief, then all you have to do is make the person they rob a bad person. Humans' morals are not as strong as we like to think they are, because you'd think, oh, well, you should be stolen from. I always laugh at I used to really enjoy the CSI series. I'd watched New York and Miami and stopped when they kept going out and out and out. Not New York, Vegas, the first one. Anyway. But it's like, I'm for due process and innocent until proven guilty. And let's not steal evidence that we did not get through legal ways. But when we see all of these characters on CSI Miami or CSI the original, and we like the characters, and we think they're good people and they do good jobs, and they're just trying to find the bad person, we cheer whenever they find something, or maybe have to bend the rules a little bit just to get their guy. And, sometimes I step back and I think, in reality, this is awful. And I'm not saying CSI always does that, but I remember seeing a couple of episodes where they kind of, bent the rules a little bit. And of course, since the person was bad and they caught the criminal, then what does it matter? But it matters. But that's my own opinion. Still, my point is that point of view makes you empathize with somebody. And if, when I was at Stone Coast, my professor, Nancy Holder, she had a saying that you can make anybody likable. You just need to, and I always forget all three of the things. It's funny. I remember there are 3 things you can do to make somebody likable. You can have them be kind to a child or an animal. If anybody wonders why the book that I referenced called Save the Cat is called Save the Cat, it's because the person who saves the cat, that tells you a lot about their personality. You can show them having great skill. We admire people with great skill. We admire Moriarty because Holmes admires him because he's supposed to be as smart as Holmes. Moriarty's a terrible person. He does terrible things, but he is so smart that it's interesting. I came across this in a video game I was playing. I was playing Overwatch the other night, and sometimes you get the sense that someone's going after you, and you can get a little mad about that. Because it feels like it becomes personal. Other times, you get a sense that you're killed over and over again by somebody because they're just that good. And, last night, I was trying to save my team at the last minute, and I was killed by a guy who then did his ultimate attack and killed everybody else on the team, and then the other team won. And I watched the replay of that going, I can't even be mad, because whoever was driving this character was so masterful that it was a pleasure to watch, even though I was on the receiving end of it. So that's somebody that I admire because they were showing great skill. I think the third thing has to do with sympathizing. That whole, they're a bad guy because they were treated poorly as a child kind of thing. Even though there are plenty of people who grow up who don't commit crimes and who have bad childhoods, but it still makes you sympathize. Also, when it comes to antagonists, no one does evil for evil's sake. they're more likely to do evil for no reason than for the reason of evil. There's some characters that thrive on chaos. And so all they want to do is just throw in the bomb and no matter to see who gets killed. I always feel guilty making too many TV and movie references, but I'm going to make a literary one now. There's a short story by Neil Gaiman called Grail, and it's told from the point of view of an old woman who finds the Holy Grail at a thrift store. Then Sir Galahad shows up at her door, asking for the Grail, and she won't give it to him. And it's told entirely from her point of view, and you get stories about her husband and her life now and her life before. And I was doing an online class on short fiction once, and somebody pointed out that in this story, the old woman is not the protagonist. She's the antagonist. Because it's Galahad who's working very hard to try to change the story and get the Grail back, and she is refusing him. So that's a story where actually the antagonist is the point of view character. But so I recommend you hunting down that story just to learn how points of view and protagonist and antagonist work. It's called Grail by Neil Gaiman. But again, everybody always has a reason for what they do. I mean, you listen to some people in government justify torture. We all know torture's bad. Torture's terrible. But then you put in your country being righteous and looking for answers from very bad people, and then you think, oh, okay. My friend Alistair Stewart was telling me about a show over in Britain where two Nazis were sitting in a foxhole talking about, I can't even remember what it was, but one of them just kind of looks up and goes, wait a minute, are we the baddies? It's odd for someone to actually find themselves wondering if they're the antagonist in a story, because everyone's story is their own, so they're clearly the hero. Why would you be the antagonist in your own story? So if you want a writing prompt, write a scene about two people working against each other, and write it from one person's point of view, and then write it from the other person's point of view, and try to make them both sympathetic. And that's all I have. Let's get to the interview with Beth Cato. Welcome back to I Should Be Writing. I have with me today Beth Cato, author of the new book Call of Fire, which is book 2 in the Breath of Earth series. How are you, Beth?
I'm doing okay. How are you?
I'm good. So let's get started. I want to ask you specifically, this is a 2-book series, right?
This is actually the second book in a trilogy.
Oh, okay. Sorry, Amazon said it was book 2 of 2, so I was interested.
Yeah.
But
well, and some people originally thought that it was just one book. It was actually a 2-book deal, which I think is why Amazon still shows it.
Ah, got it.
Yeah, and the third book was signed for just earlier this year.
Oh, congratulations. What's that one going to be called?
Roar of Sky.
Nice. So tell us a little bit about the series.
Well, it's set in 1906 in San Francisco to start off the series in Breath of Earth. And I like to joke for that book that it's, spoiler alert, there's an earthquake, because there's no avoiding the fact that the big San Francisco earthquake does happen, but for very different reasons, because this is a world where geomancy plays a major role in day-to-day life and in the economy. And my lead character is Ingrid, a woman of color who is trying to hide her ability and stay alive. And it's in a backdrop where the U.S. and Japan are allied as a world power and taking over China with world domination as their ultimate goal. And that's going into the second book. Ingrid is still trying to stay alive along with her friends Sai and Fenris and Lee. And they flee northward to Portland and Seattle, and those are where the action of the book takes place.
So you've got fantasy, alternate history, and political thriller here.
Basically, yes.
All in one. Wow. Did you have any problems mixing those genres?
Well, it just about broke my brain a couple times, especially the research involved.
You have an extensive bibliography on your page. It's a little intimidating, actually.
It's been intimidating for me to work through too. And those are the books I actually use. That doesn't even count the ones that were useless for my research needs. Yeah, it's been a very daunting series. It's one of those, if I had conceived this idea 10, 15 years ago, I wouldn't have even started writing because I would have been too overwhelmed and I would have procrastinated to death with the research. So it's been educational working on these books, not only doing the research, but how to incorporate that into the books without making them info dumpy or overwhelming or even too depressing, because going into the racism and the sexism of the time at times I just would have to stop reading a book and set it aside and go hug my cat because it was sure depressing.
So how do you balance that? I mean, you want to be historically accurate to not ignore the trials that women and people of color have gone through, but you don't want to, as you said, to bring the book down with such bigotry. How do you balance that?
A lot of it comes down to revision and trying to really read the flow, find the flow at that point and make it work. And it's so much of it is pacing. It's not about bludgeoning people with, this is what the Chinese endured. This is what the Chinese endured. It's gradual. It's hints here and there. It's using a couple of the epithets from the time period, but it's not a constant thing. It's really about moderation so that the readers can't forget what's going on and what people are facing, but it doesn't drown them in that, because I also want to build in, real human moments. There has to be some humor there. There has to be some, sarcastic comments, because my goodness, that's how people cope and make it through too. So I try and use banter and things like that to balance it and give some perspective.
So going back to your research, what made you decide to print your bibliography? I've done lots of research on projects, but I've never thought to actually list them all where people could see them.
Well, a lot of that's my own history geek thing. I love research. I love sharing it. And in this case, as I read, and I was really humbled by what I saw as a native Californian. I thought I knew a lot about my state's history, and it turned out I didn't know that much, or I only knew a very sanitized version of it. And I realized that I wanted people to know what I read so that they might search out those books for themselves and go, hey, I want to find out what the Chinese endured at the turn of the century. I want to know what this dog tag law is all about. And that way they can actually look up and say, okay, these are the actual sources I used, and pursue that reading on their own.
Cool. We have a question from Twitter. Stitchface says, what's your biggest hurdle that you regularly have to overcome when trying to get a writing project done?
Oh, gosh. Myself. I think that would be the biggest obstacle at any time. I deal with a lot of anxiety. I'm an agoraphobic. I don't leave the house that much. So I'm really at the computer all day trying to write or edit or do recipes, things like that. And it's that mirror match. It's that battle of, okay, I do still remember how to write a book. I do still remember how to write short stories. Okay, this story was rejected. I need to keep up the faith and send it out again. Do things like that. And it's a constant struggle, but I try to be very open about that process with people, because those are very common struggles for a lot of people out there who are aspiring writers. And I want them to know they are not alone and that they can succeed. It's just a matter of learning how to cope day to day.
That's exactly what this podcast is about. Yay. Can you, if it's not too personal, could you speak a little bit more of that, of how you cope?
Well, I'm OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, and I actually rely on that as a crutch a lot of times to help me to cope. To do things like, say, go to conventions. I will spend months ahead researching where I'm going, where restaurants are, every facet of the hotel. If I have friends there, I map out where they are, how I get a hold of them. Basically, because as a writer, it comes in handy sometimes to always be thinking of worst case scenarios, right?
Mm-hmm.
In my everyday life, that's not always so handy. So when I go on a trip, I do try and come up with, okay, if this happens, I do this, I go here. If the line for restaurant is long here, I'll go here, and that way I can get to my panel on time. And I try and build up scenarios in my head and kind of coach myself through what I can do and how I can handle the situation.
And does that end up helping?
It does, yeah. It helps, and then every now and then, there will be, a doozy of a surprise, like coming back from Kansas City Worldcon and was at the airport and my flight was canceled, and that was like, okay. So it's a matter of one of those situations where lock myself in the bathroom, have a good old bawl and cry for 10 minutes, compose myself, and go back out and deal with it like an adult and face up to it and survive so I could get home.
Yeah. Man, I'm sorry that happened.
Yeah, that's life. And that's kind of, you can try and prepare yourself, but you're always going to end up with some nasty surprises like that.
Yeah. Sean wants to know, which of your books would fit a gluten-free recipe for bread?
Oh, gosh. Well,
and if you want to tell the listeners specifically why he's asking that question, that might help them out.
Yeah, I have a food blog called Ready or Not, and I post a new recipe every Wednesday on bethcato.com. And I'm especially known for my sweets, my sinful cookies and bar recipes, things like that. But I do try to mix in a lot of healthy recipes and some gluten-free recipes too, just for good measure. But for some reason, those never get as much attention as the indulgent ones.
I can't imagine why.
But yeah, a good gluten-free recipe. Well, I don't have a good gluten-free recipe offhand to recommend in reference to this. But as far as my book world, I would say within my Clockwork Dagger series, I do mention many kinds of bread within that world as a world building technique. I mentioned like Franken's favor of flatbreads. And I think doing a gluten-free flatbread would probably work out better because sometimes gluten-free, the issue is getting a good rise on it because you don't have the gluten proteins there to provide that structure and that balance as it builds up with the yeast interaction. So yeah, I think a flatbread with gluten-free within my Clockwork Dagger world would actually probably work within the world building. Just I'll go with that answer.
Okay. So how much food do you put in your books?
Quite a bit at this point. It's funny. It's something I've become known for. So it's kind of like, okay, I'll just go for it because it's kind of a fun signature Beth Cato thing at this point. In Call of Fire, which just came out in August, I build in Japanese yeast breads, which weirdly enough work really well into my world building because the real invention of it was a late 19th century concept building in Japanese taste with European methods of yeast breads. And typically in Asian cultures, you really did not see yeast breads at that point. It was a very rice starch-based culture as far as their food went. But in the Meiji era in Japan, you had a lot more European influence coming in, a lot more Americans were coming in, a lot of French bakeries were going into the major cities. So then things like anpan and jamupan came in, where you have basically a soft yeast roll that's stuffed with like a jamupan. It's like a strawberry jam stuffed inside, a nice, soft, luscious yeast roll.
Wow.
And yeah, I mean, really good stuff. And you can still find it if you go around, if you can find a good Japanese bakery. I went to Hawaii for a research trip earlier this year, for research for my third book in the series. And man, there's so many good bakeries there to get good Japanese bread like that. And it was so cool to go there. And finally, even though I wrote about it, in my notes and in my rough draft for the second, was like, okay, I'm in Arizona. I can't find these actual breads. So I'm kind of having to look up, descriptions. What does it taste like? What does it look like? And finally, I was able to try them for myself when I was in Hawaii. And that was just so cool.
Wow, that's cool. Did you start out wanting to put food in all of your books, or did it just kind of grow that way? Because I know some people wonder if they should have like a constant line through the book that if you read this kind of book, you know what you're you're at least gonna get like some good food. Or did that sort of grow organically?
It's kind of grown organically. I think the first story I really had food in there in a major role was called A Recipe for Rain and Rainbows. And it had Southern pie recipes played a major role, and the magic in that. And since then, I've had a number of other short stories where food has played a role. I had a story in Nature, oh gosh, a year or two ago now, that was called Bread of Life. And that was a science fiction story that basically went to in future humanity, the cultural importance of bread in society and what that means to human memory and nostalgia. So I've worked it in throughout stories like that. It's not a constant thing. I don't want it to be like a gag. But if it can, organically work into the story, I go for it. And if possible, I also will do recipes and feature them on my site too. Kind of just do a tie-in that way.
If you go into the historical aspect of food, do you ever get anybody challenging you? I'm just thinking like a lot of military writers get challenged on their use of, Lord, you name it, any sort of weapon or time period or whatever. But do you get foodies after you?
Not yet, but I'm kind of waiting for it to happen. And on my blog, I don't typically go into the science of the food that heavily. I just, it's more of a, hey, here's a combo that tastes good. Let's go for it. But in panels, I will discuss things like that. And of course, it's just like, doing a podcast or a panel. I'm sure I'll say stupid things with great ease. And in hindsight, I wish I could edit it.
Yeah.
But, when you're in the moment, you just kind of go with the flow and hope you don't make too much of a fool of yourself.
That is very true. So how do you deal with you've mentioned how you deal with various, the agoraphobia and OCD. What about the problems of just finding time to write, making writing a priority, the balance of putting writing in your life is a question that a lot of people who listen to this show ask me. So I try to get the pros points of view.
Well, it is hard. And I'm fortunate in that I am a stay-at-home writer and mom. My son is in school most of the time now. Thank goodness the school year has started. But he's autistic. And it's on me about 98% of the time to be the one to get him to his 4 or 5 hours of therapies every week, or have the house cleaned so that the therapist can come here. And also, he's in 7th grade now, and his homework load has just been mind-boggling. And I've been having to oversee that and almost on a daily basis connect with the school and with his resource teacher and with different teachers to make sure that he knows the assignments, that he's doing them correctly, that they're being turned in, all that. And that feels like a
full-time job.
It really does. And you think, oh, yay, he's in school. Yay, I have all this free time. But it really doesn't seem that way, especially when it's a matter of he gets home from school and I'm spending the next 2-3 hours at therapy with him or helping him do homework. And then it's suddenly it's bedtime and I need to get sleep. So that really has made it a challenge, especially in the past month. Fortunately, I kind of cleared out my major deadlines right before his school year started. I turned in my draft of Roar of Sky to my editor. I did edits on my collection that is coming out in early November. Had all that stuff squared away so then I could focus on my book release, going to Gen Con, all that. But it's still just been like, oh my goodness, I just want to have time to sit down and write again. And the past few days I have actually been working on a new story, and that feels really, really good. There's kind of a catharsis to when all of these life things are getting in your way. It feels like a triumph to actually sit down in chair and write something and feel like, okay, I am actually a writer again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I gotta say that it's heartening to hear you say that, there are off days. And
oh, yeah.
when you have off days, it doesn't mean you're not a writer. It means you're a human being. And, you know, if you as a new writer have an off day, it doesn't mean that all hope is lost. It means tomorrow you try again.
Yeah.
Let me check Twitter, see if anybody else had any questions. I don't think so. Is there anything you want to tell our listeners that we haven't touched on?
I don't think so. We covered a good variety of topics already.
Okay. And do you have any advice for new writers?
Stay stubborn.
Nice.
That is my biggest advice, because you're going to have to battle yourself. You're going to have to battle feedback from others. You're going to have family who tells you to stop writing. You're going to have just other people who don't understand what writing is, or they dismiss it as a hobby, not as a career. And you have to believe in yourself on some deep level and clutch onto that with everything you have, and just stay stubborn and keep going at it no matter what.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Beth. I have a copy of... Actually, I'll be getting a copy of book 1 as well to send out to a lucky listener. So if you're interested in Beth's book, send me an email, and please spread the word on Twitter that this show is out. And the book is Call of Fire, book 2 of Breath of the Earth series. Beth, where can we find you online?
BethCato.com, and that's Cato spelled C-A-T-O. And on there, they can find links to Twitter, Facebook. They can find lots of cookie recipes. I have a monthly newsletter where I compile all the month's recipes. And there's a huge bibliography on there where they can find all about everything else I publish too.
Yes, if you have any questions about how to do an author website, you should check out Beth's, because I was perusing that and went, man, that's the way to do it. It's an excellent site. So thank you so much for being on the show, Beth.
Thanks. It's been great to talk to you.
Remember, if you want to get copies of her books, you can appreciate a share on social media, and then send me a note, and I'll pick, before the next episode, I'll pick who wins by a random number generator. Or maybe I'll roll a die, which is also known as a random number generator. You can see the blog and show notes at merverse.com, and you can email me at mightymur@gmail.com. If you support the podcast on Patreon, then you will be pushing us toward going weekly instead of bi-weekly. Bi-weekly, I can't remember the difference between bi and semi. Twice a month. That's currently. If you're interested in I Should Be Writing the book, you can order it online. I'm not sure if it's reached the stores yet. If someone has found one in the stores, please send me a note or a picture or something. I would love to see that. We've had some problems with the database, and it has not had the triumphant release that I hoped it would. My other book, 6 Wakes, is still available. It's a clone murder mystery in space. And if you like short fiction, you can listen to the podcast that I edit called Escape Pod at escapepod.org. And it's free, and it's a weekly story, and it's awesome. And that's it for me. I must go edit this now and post it, and then get to work, because I should be writing, and so should you. Remember, you can support the show at patreon.com/mightymur. I Should Be Writing theme music provided by John Anelio. You can find more about him at johnanelio.com. This podcast is distributed under a Creative Commons Attribution Share-alike license.